You ever been in a Bible study, right? And you're reading a verse, but the person next to you, their Bible says something totally different. You've got the King James, the NIV, the NRSV. I mean, if it's all one book, why so many versions? It's a great question. So let's actually trace the incredible journey of just a single verse to figure this out.
All right, to really see what we're talking about, let's just dive right into an example. We're going to put one verse under the microscope, and we'll start with the very first verse of the book of Psalms.
Okay, so here it is. In the NIV, you get, "Blessed is the man." But then you look at the NRSV and the GNB, and they both start with, "Happy are those." See the difference already? And it keeps going. The NIV talks about not walking in the counsel of the wicked, but the others say not following their advice, or even rejecting it. The main idea, yeah, it's kind of the same, but the words themselves and the whole vibe they give off, totally different.
And this, of course, brings up the big question, right? The one that's at the heart of all this. So, which one is right? Which one's the correct one? Well, the answer is way more fascinating and honestly a bit more complex than you might think.
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to go back, way back. And it all starts with this. Well, it's a pretty surprising fact about the original biblical documents.
Yeah, you heard that right. The original scrolls, the actual pages that Moses or Paul or the other authors wrote on, what scholars call the autographs, they don't exist anymore. Not a single one. They're all gone.
So if the originals are gone, what are translators even working with? Well, they're working with copies. And copies of copies of copies, all painstakingly written out by hand by scribes over hundreds and hundreds of years.
And get this, for the New Testament alone, we're talking about more than 5,000 of these Greek manuscripts. And because every single one was copied by hand, guess what? No two are exactly alike. You've got little variations, different spellings, maybe a note a scribe added in the margin.
Okay, so this is where the first really big job for any translator begins. It's a whole field of study called textual criticism, and honestly, it's basically like scholarly detective work. Now, I know that name, criticism, sounds a little negative, right? But it's not about criticizing the Bible, not at all. It's about critically analyzing all the evidence. These scholars look at thousands of manuscripts, they compare how old they are, the quality of the copy, where they came from, and they use all that info to piece together the most reliable ancient text they possibly can. The goal is always to get as close to the original wording as humanly possible.
And here's where it gets really, really cool. This shows you the massive leap in the evidence we have. Think about it. When the King James Version was translated back in 1611, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscript they had was from around the year 1008. But then, bam! 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered, and suddenly we have texts that date all the way back to before the time of Jesus. We're talking about texts that are over 1,000 years older than what the KJV translators had to work with. That's a game changer. It means today's translators have a much clearer, much earlier picture of the Old Testament.
Okay, so once all that detective work is done and the scholars have put together the best possible ancient text, well, that's when the second big challenge kicks in. How do you actually translate it from ancient Hebrew or Greek into a language we understand today, like English?
And spoiler alert, it is not as simple as just swapping out one word for another. You can't just use a dictionary. It's been called an artful science for a reason. Languages are so deeply tied to culture and context. There just isn't always a perfect one-to-one match for every single word.
So this puts translators at a crossroads. They have to make a choice. Do you go for a word-for-word translation, which might sound really stiff and awkward in English? Or do you aim for what's called dynamic equivalence, where the goal is to translate the original thought or the idea into a phrase that sounds natural to us today? It's the difference between translating the words and translating the meaning.
And this brings us right back to our example from Psalm 1. It's the perfect illustration of this whole dilemma. The original Hebrew word is ashrei. But that one little word, it can mean blessed, it can mean happy, it can even mean fortunate or oh so enviable. So what do? The NIV team went with blessed, which feels a bit more formal, more religious. But the NRSV and GNB teams, they chose happy, which feels more modern, more relatable. So is one of them wrong? No, they're just different interpretive choices, different attempts to capture the full flavor of that one Hebrew word, ashrei.
So we've seen how the philosophy of translation can lead to different readings. But now let's look at a really famous example where it's not about philosophy at all. It's about the actual manuscript evidence making a huge, huge difference.
Okay, let's look at the story of Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus.
In the good old King James Version, you've got these famous lines. "It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks," and Saul saying, "Lord, what wilt thou have me to do?" Classic stuff. But then, you pick up a modern version like the RSV, and poof, those phrases are just gone. They're completely missing.
So, what gives? Did modern translators just decide to take a pair of scissors to the Bible and cut some words out? What happened here?
Well, it's actually the complete opposite. Remember those text detectives and all those older manuscripts we were talking about? They discovered something amazing. It seems that centuries ago, a well-meaning scribe was copying this chapter and probably thought, hey, I can make this better, so he added those extra words. He actually copied them from other parts of the book of Acts where the same story is told again, probably just to make this version feel more complete.
So the King James translators weren't doing anything wrong or sneaky, not at all. They were just working with the best manuscripts they had back in 1611. And the copies they had, they already included that scribe's helpful little addition. Modern translations, on the other hand, are based on much older copies that show us what the text looked like before those words were ever added in.
All right, so we've got textual detectives and translation theories and scribal additions. Let's bring this all home. What does all of this actually mean for us when we just want to sit down and read the Bible today?
The biggest takeaway is this. It's really not about one version being right and another being wrong. It's about realizing that every single translation is the result of this incredible, diligent, and very human process. So instead of seeing the differences and getting confused, we can actually use them as a tool. Comparing how different Bibles translate the same passage can be amazing. It can reveal all these deeper layers of meaning that were there in the original Hebrew or Greek all along.
You know, the theologian Dr. Jacob Cherian puts it really well. He says that when we fight over which translation is the best, it kind of just shows we don't really get how this whole complex process works. The variety of Bibles we have isn't some problem we need to solve. It's a resource, one that can make our understanding so much richer.
So, does knowing all this diminish the text? No way. If anything, it does the opposite. It shows you the incredible, almost unbelievable story of how this text was preserved through centuries of dedicated human effort. It shines a light on the incredible scholarship that brings these ancient words to us. So the next time you pick up a Bible, any version at all, remember what you're holding. It's not just a book. It's a library. It's a whole history of scholarship, preservation, and faith, all right there in your hands.